Welcome, folks, to the 20th of March Aries Working Group call. We're glad you're here. The link is in the chat. This is the Hyperledger call, so there's just policy and the code of conduct are in effect. Links also in the agenda. You can find it in the chat or in the on the Hyperledger wiki under Aries. I recognize everyone here. I'm glad you're all back. The announcements, April 16th is within a month here for IW, so that's ramping up pretty fast, which is pretty cool. Are there any projects that would like to share status or work updates?
Quick one.
We're very close to 12.0, 12.0, so almost done that. Yeah, that's it for that. Go ahead, whoever was speaking. Sorry about that.
Was that you, Patrick?
Yeah, it's all good. Thank you. Short update from Aries V6. We have finally implemented it before, just freshly, yet to be merged, and got a did exchange suits passing locally on ATH. Got some build issues there, but yeah, there'll be hopefully ATH update also very soon. So that's all from our side.
Very cool. Any other updates?
We have also Credo 05 officially released last week.
I'm not in edit mode.
Woo!
That's awesome.
Congrats. That's awesome.
Very nice. Thank you for reporting. Other projects, that's 3 right there. Nice. Well done, folks. Okay, here's what I have on the agenda for today. Suggestions on edits or rearranging is welcome. I wanted to quickly cover the OpenID DIDComm work that has been being pursued by IDUnion. And then a reminder about the ecosystem document. None of us have put anything there, including me. And so that's something that does need some attention. I have a number of PRs to review, some of them quite new. That's Steven's fault. Some of them a little bit older. And so wanted to go through and talk about those, gather some data. And then the notes from the previous week on the DIDComm v2 conversion. We've accomplished a lot already from the happening soon list. This is the list from the new what we wanted to accomplish with these protocols, prior to migrating to DIDComm v2 protocols. And so there's open work there, and happy to answer any questions if folks are interested in doing so but don't know how to get started. And then this is an old conversation about common identifiers that I was going to revisit if we have time. That's what I've got on the agenda. Any adjustments, changes, additions, removals that we should do before we get going?
Hey, Sam.
Yeah.
Can I throw something out that I should have done in the announcements? I apologize.
Yeah.
Let me just hold on. Shoot, I had it a second ago. Where did it go? We had a whole bunch. BC Gov ran a whole bunch of ledgers in addition to bSovereign test. There it is. So we had one called bSovereign Dev and bSovereign Prod and Greenlight Dev, and those worked their ways into a number of tutorials and things like that. We've shut all except bSovereign test down, and then pointed all of the DNS records, and therefore you can find the Genesis files for all of those other ledgers at bSovereign test. So now they all point to the same ledger. So if you're just doing tutorials and things like that, and you ran into these, no problem. If you actually had something that was long lasting on Greenlight Dev ledger, dev.greenlight.bsovereign.vonex.io, it's gone. So just be aware of that. So we did it in a way that anyone using it in the way intended, which is just as tutorials that last, and then you go on. Those keep working, and Be Sovereign Test keeps working just as it always did. That's the one that many mobile agents use, and so on. So just wanted to bring that announcement. We've shut them down. We could spin them up through April 1st. We're going to turn them off permanently on April 1st. We'll snapshot them even then. So even if they really, really, really have to come back, we could do it. So anyway, thank you. Sorry about that for missing that in the announcements.
No, that's awesome. Okay. All right. Okay. First up topic is me. This is the OpenID DIDComm work by IDUnion. Here is the repository URL. Docs and cleanup still in progress here, but what we had demonstrated on Monday was a working code example that's here in code or will be here in code that has a TypeScript-based text UI that demonstrates the process of starting an OpenID VCI, verifiable credential issuance protocol flow, but with some additional metadata in place and an additional DIDComm protocol that allows you to either optionally or in a mandatory way require the support the creation of a linked DIDComm session so that you can be involved in the OpenID flow, but get a DIDComm session out of it in addition to the credential issuance. And so in the demo, you create an issuer, you create an offer, you out of band pass that to the other party, as is done with that's not an out of band DIDComm message, that's just an out of band OpenID message pass. And then as part of the process that happens, it ends up creating and confirming a DIDComm connection, and then the credential offer could continue. The example uses the required option, and then they demonstrate being able to send basic messages back and forth as a result of now having a DIDComm connection in a result of that. So it more or less uses the metadata and access tokens that are involved in a normal OpenID for verifiable credential issuance flow, and uses it to associate a DIDComm channel. And so that work is really cool, and it's coming. There is a README as well in the main file here, but it contains a running stream of consciousness that got us to where we did. We tested 5 different options and ended up doing this last one. And so what we need to do is keep these notes but somewhere else, and then simplify the README to just focus on the one that we used. And so that work is going really nicely. Still in protocol form here is the simple DIDComm protocol used to associate the OpenID interactions with the other stuff. It needs a link. There's a non-link right there that needs to point to the rest of the documentation that's involved here. So that work has been done by the folks at IDUnion and over in Europe, and they will not be able to attend IEW, so I'll be presenting that there. But this is a nice way to both comply with European legislation and have your DIDComm too. And so this requires no update to either specs, and uses common conventions inside of the OpenID flows anyway, in the form of a scope that you request for the access token in order to make that happen. So, any questions about this?
Cool. Very cool.
It's very cool. They started the effort. I kind of joined and helped out a little bit, but all the real work was done by those folks, and so really neat. Last IW, there's this question about how to make them get along. We postulated the existence of some method like this.
Yep.
There's now a method that does this, and there are several ways to do it. The way we ended up with is, we believe, the cleanest and simplest way, even though some of the others will work. And so for the sake of not creating too much options unless you actually need them, we're just going to focus on promoting the one. Cool. Any other questions or comments?
Very cool. I still don't love to see a picture of what's talking where.
Yeah, it's here.
Yeah, I figured it was somewhere, so I thought I'd take a look after, but fascinating.
Yeah, so the fundamentals is that the issuer publishes metadata. This is OpenID stuff. In it is the DID to use for the DIDComm connection, and whether the DIDComm connection is required or optional. And then all of this stuff here is the same. This is the pre-authorized flow and the pre-authorized flow both work identically for the purposes of establishing a DIDComm connection. But then you get the difference too is that when you make the token request, either in the pre-authorized or in the authorized flow, it's not represented here, but you include a scope. And there's a designated scope, for example, you'll see here university degree credential, where you're specifying the type of credential that you're actually involved for. And when the token comes back, you both request and it comes back with an additional DIDComm scope included there.
Yep.
And then that signifies in OpenID language that this provided token works for these purposes. And then this DIDComm protocol, which I just showed you a second ago, the names are different, is used to associate the associated either new or existing DIDComm connection with that token. I'm using associate, not bind, for very specific reasons. But anyway, you do this interaction, and then you can actually request the token. If this is required, then you have to do the DIDComm exchange prior to the server actually responding positively to the credential request. If it's optional, then the server can go ahead and return it, and this can happen in a totally separate timeline. May happen before or after. But this allows the server to require a DIDComm connection for the issuance of the OpenID credential if they have determined that they need one to fulfill their business purposes.
So two things, Sam. That DIDComm DID at the top, is that got to be a peer DID or some resolvable DID that gives you the service endpoint, right?
This is a resolvable DID. So if it's a peer DID for it works, but any DID method works here as long as it's resolvable.
Any DID method as long as there's a service endpoint, a DIDComm service in it, and then all you're doing is using the token as a binding. Yeah, okay, I get it. That's very cool.
Yes.
Very cool.
So I'm using association, and maybe improperly, binding
that's
in
fine.
some.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, what I meant to say actually was you're using the token as a shared secret, so you know that who the two parties are.
Yes.
The parties know one another. You're using it as a shared secret.
So I'm staying away from binding because binding typically involves some cryptography that involves identifiers of the channel, and we're not doing that directly. So as to avoid attracting the irk of folks that feel strongly about that, I'm using association. But yes, you're picking up exactly how this works. It's actually really simple. There's some additional metadata here. You specify an additional scope in the token request, and it comes back in the response. And then that's the only modifications actually used in the OpenID side of the protocol. And then there's a DIDComm protocol associated with how to do this. So it's not complicated. And doesn't require, this is really like a profile of these specifications in the sense that it doesn't change the specifications, but it adds some additional information to them that then, and a convention of using DIDComm as a scope, which then makes it work. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we talked about and how to sort of make those associations work. Including like passing a credential, etc. And we determined that we didn't gain anything with the additional complexity, and so the access token method ended up being really the cleanest way. So when we clean up this doc, this is what you're going to see: you're going to see a flow that describes this and is a little bit cleaned up, rather than all of our previous stream of consciousness, which we'll save in a different document.
One quick question, Sam. Is this DIDComm 1 or 2?
2.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
To be clear, though,
you could still do it, but somehow that acknowledge has got to have a service endpoint on it.
Well, what you would do in DIDComm v1 land is you would first do a DID exchange, and then you would present the token.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
That's all in one step, of course, in DIDComm v2. So this was designed with DIDComm v2 in mind. Oh, and the code example that lives up here is actually created using Verimo libraries, and apparently Spherion has some libraries in addition to the mobile app. They have some libraries that this is also using. There are some limitations on the code example right now, but relatively unimportant ones. Specifically, the code example only works with DIDweb because of the built-in DID method resolution capabilities of the Spherion wallet, I believe. I could be wrong about that, but anyway, the DIDweb thing is a restriction of the demo, but not of the architecture or flow. That's just, they just used the libraries they had to demonstrate it, which is awesome. So, so that's how that's going. I in particular love that this is identical between the authorized flow and the pre-auth flow, and so it doesn't matter which one you do, it works the same. And I like that it can be required or optional. And what happens is if it's required and you try to go request the credential prior to doing the DIDComm exchange, and there's not an associated DIDComm connection, then there's already documented error code for the credential issuer in OpenID to say no or not yet, and that signals that the requirements haven't really been fulfilled yet. So yeah, I love that this is. Go ahead.
Just as a side issue, that in the BC wallet, when the government issues the person credential, we actually use an OpenID Connect app that is determines who the person is, and we're using a very similar approach, which is a shared secret between that passes in that connection and is used then to determine which DIDComm connection the person is associated with. So something actually surprisingly similar to what you've got here, or
Well,
not.
Yeah, I think it's not surprisingly similar.
Yeah.
The use of a bearer token to associate two things in entirely separate channels is one of the fundamental tenets of OpenID itself.
Okay.
And so the fact that we both arrived at the same solution is actually a good sign that we both are doing this in the most OpenID way possible from the OpenID side of things.
Yeah. Awesome.
And the reason for publishing this, even though of course people can come to the same conclusions by themselves and do this sort of thing, is that if we all do it the same way, then it makes compatibility easier. And since they're very, very similar anyway. Anyway, so that's the idea. And so this will be presented at IW, and then there's some noising about that we'll do from the DIDComm side to talk about this, why it's useful, how to do it. So cool. Anything else on that? All right. Repeated plea for anyone who is willing to put a little bit of time into the what? Someone did it. That's Fabric. Oh, never mind. I linked to the wrong thing.
Oh man.
Hang on. I made a page. It's still sad. I have also not put anything there, but if anyone is willing to even just hunt down information on other wiki pages and stick it in the ecosystem page, that would be grateful. We'll need to work on that and refine it, but the more information we can get, the better. And then there's the example Fabric ecosystem doc, which is a great example of this. Any questions on that? So that's anyone with a wiki login can go ahead and help there pretty easily. All right, let's do some PR review. 821 was submitted by Mr. Steven here within the last 24 hours. This changes the examples to use 1.1 as the newest version of this. Changes the examples. This is a fairly straightforward cleanup. And some minor formatting here, some changes in the examples, and then some addition of some mail-to links of the DID exchange protocol. Anyone opposed to these changes?
I think we are missing the update on the title, right?
Well, that's a good point.
Well, I debated changing it, and I didn't think we should change the type. Like, it's problematic to put it in the top. At most, we could remove it. It is the version 1 major, so we can drop the .0.
Or 1.x.
But I get what you mean. I decided not to change it just because it sets a bad practice that we change, that we probably shouldn't have it in the thing at all, or even if we do, it should just be the major version.
I like the major version. Not including it is problematic if you have 2 versions of the DID exchange protocol or whatever protocol. But
Yeah.
One of the things that we could do is just list it as 1.x, which may signify that this is the major version changes and all the minors.
Yeah, I prefer to put just version 1, but the .0 I'm happy to drop if that's what people think.
That's probably clearer than the 1.0.
Yeah.
You might put a V there.
Yeah,
so
that's
know
what I was
the
gonna
one
do.
is.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, V1. Yeah, V1 as opposed to version 1. Yeah.
With the 1.0, it's a little bit more obvious. Without the 7 hinting in there, then it's a little bit vaguish. That's a great idea. Okay. Is that something you're going to do real quick, Stephen, or should I go out of comment?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that really quickly.
Cool. Well, Stephen is doing that. Here is 820. This was discussed. This is part of the changes that we made from last time, but we couldn't make them because we were still updating RFCs as part of the commits we did last week. And so this has the subsequent changes, and it has some the clarifications note added, and then there's the additional information about removing of payments. We have some new commits that are linked here for the related protocols, and actually the removal of static pure DIDs, an addition of OR and or practical to implement. This is a change to the commit for the please act feature as we removed it from AIP2. So this represents just the one that has been retired. And then static pure DIDs has moved down to this section, which is the this is not showing here, but it's the
removed.
It's the removed section there.
Oh yeah, because it's okay. Phew.
So and then here we have that note. So this is really a follow-up of the stuff that we did last week, but because we updated AIP2, but also had some other updates that we did at the same time. This is basically just the reapplying of the same type of updates that we made last week, but this week. Is anyone would like more time to review, or as opposed to merging this PR?
I think this just follows on from last week, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Let me add some documentation here. Let's see, 0320.
Copy and paste that before you go. Yeah.
Yes.
Because we're going to say that again, I think.
We are going to say that again. Okay, 819. This one is one side very uncontroversial, and the other side may be a little bit of discussion. The first thing that this has done here is just an update to the index. The reason why the update to the index is actually needed is because the GitHub action that we have here that actually generates the index is not running properly, and so Stephen is proposing that we remove this just so we stop getting error messages about this. And then what we'll need to do is just manually update this until we make some other associated change. And we've discussed a number of things, one of which could be, for example, building this into a better sort of GitHub, not GitHub Pages style, but
static website, make docs.
Yeah, like make docs is the term I was going for. I was thinking DocuSource, and that wasn't the answer. So like a make docs generated navigable site that looks all pretty and doesn't rely on just GitHub's file navigation. And so Steven's proposing that we remove this instead of repairing it, so that we can, and it's been broken for some time, and then we can replace it with working stuff later. Is anyone opposed to that change?
And I think you should really put pressure on Stephen to do that right away, like by next week, to have a website ready to go.
I think Steven should get on that.
I think so.
Someone tell him, because that
Yeah,
would be awkward if he just heard that on the side.
yeah.
So yeah, that would be totally awesome.
And especially since he's the one taking this out, this auto-generated thing out.
I think you've committed yourself to the replacement then by that action, Stephen. Anyone opposed to merging this? Just to be clear, the idea is that there would be a new GitHub action that builds it the new way.
Exactly.
We're not anti-GitHub action. We're just taking out a GitHub action that does not work.
One that fails every time is kind of annoying.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to hit that. Have you updated the previous one by chance?
I have. It's all done.
All right, let's go here. File changed. It just says V1 here. Ariel, was that your suggestion? So that's complete.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up. I think that's an improvement. Is anyone opposed to merging this? All right. This update is also by Stephen. We decided to retire please ACK, and then this update removes references to please ACK from other protocols. So included in that, of course, is the ACKs protocol. There's the introduce protocol, which is I don't believe is in heavy or even any use. It's actually kind of a cool one because it's a way of saying like, hey, Steve, meet Ariel or something, and that way you can pass a did through that, which is kind of neat. This is the sync connection, abandon, which is something that was discussed early on, but also not in heavy use. This is more sync connection examples. Here's in problem report. And so it mentions the ACK part of that to remove it. Revocation notification is also dropped here. This is one of the controversial state please ACK things instead of just message receipt. Here's coin flip protocol, which is really an example protocol, but clarifying with removing that is helpful. And then issue credential v2, present proof. And then revocation notification v2 is also referenced here. I think the only comment that I could offer is that if there was someone that came looking for this feature, and I think it's maybe unlikely, and we changed the RFC, it would be difficult for someone to detect that without a note that we drop in the change log of each of these RFCs.
Oh, okay.
Do we think that's worth the effort? It's probably to be a little more fully hygienic would be ideal, I think.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to that. I think that's a good idea. I think always having a change log entry is a good idea. So.
Well, and that's a copy paste operation because it's the same log entry for all of them.
Yep. Yep. No, it's trivial.
Cool.
I'm happy to do that. I won't do that on the fly, but I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, that's more than just just a couple of characters. So let me note here. Okay, let me add that in there just for historical sake. Which leaves us with the next one. We're out of the recent ones, and this one is down the list. By the way, with these efforts that we did last week and this week, and thanks again to Stephen for organizing and promoting that, we are nearly out of PRs that were created in 2023. Oddly and interestingly, there's some stuff in 2022 and before that we'll talk about. Those also need to be cleaned up, but some longer discussion is necessary because of some of the historical context there. Some of them I think we can just close, but there's some good concepts there that I would love to not lose as part of the process, and I have a discussion later in the meeting today for that. This was created by Kim, who's here on the call. Kim, let me do a quick update, and then I can defer to you for any corrections. This proposes the use of a specific type of Z-standard compression library that produces a common dictionary that we would use as a community that would allow for the compression of OpenID, that would allow for the compression of out-of-band invitations because of sort of the common elements actually used in it. And so it describes the process of doing that and noting the relevant dictionaries that are actually used. And what this does is that you create the dictionary off of a chunk of data, and it will pull out sort of commonly used things and then offer substitutions that can then be reversed on the decompression step. So this isn't compression in the traditional sense. Well, I mean it is, except it's a pretty human understandable one where most of us don't really know how like gzip works. This is a relatively understandable one that can allow that to happen. And so this is part of that process there. And he has examples here of sort of walking through what actually happens with the invitation URL, which can be quite large because of how that happens, and then going through the process of actually compressing that. There's a 40, it's smaller than half, given the example that he used. Is actually shown there. There are QR codes also shown here. This makes the point that the smaller the URL, the smaller the QR code, which means that on a fixed screen size like a cell phone, the individual blocks are larger, and it should be easier to scan off of a screen of a device with a less dense QR code. That's my summary. There's some. The commentary that I saw seemed to mostly focus on comparison with other compression methods. At least that was Timo's comment down here. And then Stephen, you had some stuff here as well. Oh, you noticed that we should swap out the protocol name for the new one. So instead
Very minor.
That's been, yeah, it's a very, very minor update, and doesn't materially affect the performance of the protocol. So those are the two things given there. And then Stephen just
actually the second comment I think is relevant. I'm not sure what the example is using, but it should be using did peer.
Yeah, using did peer I think would
make it longer.
That will help actually understand what the benefits are, but since did peers are likely to be used commonly, I think that's a reasonable that's a reasonable request. And perhaps we have an example using a did peer and an example not using a did peer, just so that you can kind of see the effects. Because it depends, maybe if you're an institution and you're not using did peer, then you might want to, and producing out-of-band invitations, then that could have an effect there. Kim, any corrections or clarifications that are necessary?
So the compression concept here isn't necessarily limited to out-of-band invitations. This is just an example that I was able to demonstrate. The challenge that DIDComm has is that we don't have strict ordering in messages between the sender and receiver, and so any compression algorithm is going to be based on a kind of a small packet of data. And one of the disadvantages of trying to compress a small packet of data is that the compression algorithm typically doesn't have a reference, a large reference of data to generate a good tree or reference of previous patterns to do the compression with. And so the Z standard, and if I can share my screen for a minute here, Sam.
Yeah.
All right, do you guys see my screen here?
Yep.
So Z Standard has on its website a case for small data compression, which is talking about a data set that consists of 10,000 records, each about a 1 kilobyte in size each, and showing that your normal compression ratio is about 2.85, but with a dictionary you can achieve a much larger compression ratio if the data set has a good amount of shared information between the different records. And so if we're looking at compressing the small messages that we're sending in DIDComm over and over again, using something like a dictionary could increase the compression ratio significantly. As far as the difference between Z Standard versus gzip, I just really quickly took the data that was in the invitation. So this is the raw data pulled out of base 64 encoding, and then ran it through gzip and Z Standard, and you can see that the file sizes here, the Z Standard actually has a small advantage over gzip without dictionary compression. And then as far as other prior works, there's also Brotley introduces the concept of a dictionary that's targeted at standard HTML or CSS based files. And that's what can give Brotley a particular advantage over for small file compression. But yeah, I mean, there certainly could be some advantages of just using a compression library out the gate without dictionary support. You know, as we see here, there's a around, if we look at the gzip compression ratio here, you know, it's about a reduction in about 30% size of compressed using compression without a dictionary. So yeah, some benefits can be realized without using a dictionary. And so the point that Timo was making is that, yeah, we could see some benefits of just using a standard compression algorithm. On a side note, the two numbers that I used here, the gzip was using a, I believe a -9.
So max compression.
Yeah, and I did the same for Z Standard. I did a -9.
So if we were to do a dictionary, it seems like as long as we can come up with a dictionary that works pretty well, then what we should do is band together as a community, provide examples for the dictionary training, and then all refer to the same dictionary. Like it gets hosted somewhere, and then we all pull it in, and that way there's not an infinite number of dictionaries that we're trying to manage, but a small set that is managed by the community. And clearly, what we could do is then update. You could perhaps signal which dictionary is used in a very concise way, and then we could you know, periodically, and I don't mean frequently, but maximum once every 6 months, more likely once a year or something, we could, or less, we could update that dictionary when sufficient gains can be had because of significant changes in message usage, which would then allow for that bandwidth savings to actually occur.
Yeah, and so example here is in the URL, I provided D=1, indicating dictionary 1 as
Right.
part of the URL. And we can see here that, you know, we took the Let's see here. I don't have the extra URL data on here, and so it's hard to compare the numbers. I have the base64 encode these values to see what the compression ratio would be with the URL included. So I don't have that at the moment.
Well, yes, except that the URL can change length. It would be the necessary part of it, like the additional of the dictionary attribute. Part of me thinks it would actually be worth putting a strict prepend on the start of the out of band string, just to avoid any confusion, because we don't actually use the command line, you know, like query parameters for any other purpose inside of out of band invitations. That's solely up to the hosting, and so. Instead, dropping those values into the thing. We can also, instead of saying dictionary one, we can kind of say method one, which also specifies which compression and which dictionary to use in the same thing. So out of just a byte or two, you know, we can get a significant amount of meaning encoded.
Yeah. And so the base64 increases the size of the data here, and so I could finish putting together an example with gzip. I'm to provide kind of, hey, what does the gzip size actually look like and the overall URL reduction?
Right. So an implementation note. In order for these to be used in out-of-band invitations, we have to decide as a community that this is what we're doing, so that there's broad support, and you can produce one of these compressed messages with confidence that it can be decoded by someone else, right? Anyone that can understand an out-of-band invitation would also be able to understand the compression that we're using. There's two things we can do to implement this for non-out-of-band messages. You mentioned it could be applied, you know, outside of that. One of them is that we agree as a community that we're going to do this, and then we add support. The other thing that we could do is we could, and these are not necessarily mutually exclusive, is we add a known value to discover features, which would allow you to list which of these compression methods, you know, for example, which dictionaries, etc., you are capable of using, and that could be dropped to on subsequent messages. So as soon as it discovers features disclosures understood, then you're capable of engaging any of the common shared, you know, compression methods with the other party. And that would mean that the initial messages would be a little bit larger, and then you'd drop to the additional savings as it came.
And the other opportunity there would be that after discover features is called, you could also potentially send over a dictionary. If you know that this is going to be a long-term connection and you have an optimized dictionary for your particular use cases, you could potentially share a specific dictionary. You
could. That's actually an angle I hadn't thought of. That would be cool.
I'm not sure that there would be a huge amount of benefit off of a standard, more than a standard dictionary. So I'm not sure the juice is worth the squeeze on that one.
Well, this is stuff we can do math on, right? If we have example stuff and we have the common dictionary, for example, the same thing could be used to deploy a new version of the dictionary. We could decide as a community, like, hey, you've got to get better than like 10% improvement over the previous one, or it just isn't worth it, you know, it isn't worth the effort. And so that's something that we can decide, and that can help guide whether a custom dictionary or an updated dictionary for the community would actually be worth it in that particular case.
So I guess the other thing that we want to add here is DIDComm compression,
deployment features. Yeah, deployment considerations, I think would be
sharing of custom dictionaries.
A quick thought on that one. I'm trying to. I was sitting there trying to think of how you would distribute custom dictionaries, and obviously, you know, there's a URL where it's published or whatever. Would it make sense to make it into like a language dependency so that it goes into like NPM? so that you could just have a version that is a dependency in your requirements file for whatever language you're using. So you have a repo that has essentially a wrapper for the dictionary. Would that be a way to distribute dictionaries and keep them up to date? Because you don't want to dynamically get them. This is something you want to have preloaded and fixed at compile time, I would think.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
as far as like static dictionaries go,
Yeah,
static dictionaries you would want to ship with your DIDComm library.
Yeah. Yes. So the important part is the URL of where it is so that anyone can use it independent of the actual library. But having a convenience library
Yeah.
that includes those is absolutely something that would be make sense. And I think, Kim, your point of the fact that maybe it's something that is embedded either directly or as a dependency of a DIDComm library, it makes tons of sense. The dictionaries themselves are not very large typically.
No,
Um,
it's more the hassle of getting them and loading them at runtime and having them up to date. Whereas I'm just thinking dependencies are just, that's what they're for, is to keep things up to date
It
and to
is.
allow you to
It's
implement.
not a perfect solution if it's based on a library, just because of the complexities of that. Different languages or different library support, but certain for popular libraries, like including it just natively is good. I think we can minimize the effects of if we decide to do this. I think we minimize the effects of keeping it up to date by, number one, never changing it. We just declare a new version.
Yeah, sure.
And then we work as a community to gather these things together. And here's an example. One of the things that will appear a lot, obviously the unique part of a did is not going to repeat, but the did method itself will. And so if we have examples from all of the dids that people are using, then we use that to train the dictionary. Then those initial did values will actually be part of the dictionary, yielding further bytes of compression simply by working as a community to produce a good library in the first place, a good dictionary via the training. And so I think that that's a really valuable piece there that we could do if we felt like this was worth the benefit. We've talked about other things we could do to make messages smaller, and one of the largest things, of course, is go to a different encoding that isn't JSON based. That would, of course, yield a ton, but is also a much larger effort and much further out on the timeline than something like this could be possible. So whether we do this or not depends on how popular of an idea this is and how much benefit people think they would gain from it in their production deployments. As a result, there's some bandwidth savings. There's also some speed savings, and this may be of substantial benefit. But we have to, again, to use Kim's phrase, we have to measure to see if the juice is going to be worth the squeeze for this particular effort. If we do nothing, of course, we have no compression over what we have now. And if there is enough interest, then this is definitely something that we can work to standardize, so that this is used in that manner. Any comments, questions?
I mean, to me, the biggest thing would be, does this allow elimination of redirects for QR codes, or are we still going to have redirects for QR codes? If it doesn't deal with that, it's a lot of work for what amounts to HTTP savings. That's the big one for me, and I'm not sure. And the biggest problem there is something like connectionless, where you're putting a presentation request into the QR code. That's really problematic because those can get very large. Is this going to deal with that problem?
I think there's two separate things to consider here, Stephen. One is the connectionless, and then the second one is just a reduction in standard QR code size.
Yeah.
And so there may be benefits for Bluetooth or other type environments where scanning a smaller QR code without redirection would be valuable. And so there might still be some rationale on doing a adding compression support to the out of band,
Yeah.
without the redirect algorithm.
In other words, just to be clear, because you get a higher quality, a higher likelihood that the QR code is properly scanned on the first go. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
Well, and that's going to be a little bit implementation dependent. Sometimes there's rules for like, what size of QR code, et cetera, is required for a particular implementation. But definitely making a substantial move in that direction, I think, could eliminate that. But I think your question is still the right one. Sorry, go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, and then the second part of that is the connectionless. And so QR code quality, I think, is one one discussion point there.
One of the interesting bits is that for connectionless, the actual credential request is not encrypted, which means that any of those common elements inside of the request would also be subject to dictionary compression. Obviously, the unique pieces would not be, right? But the non-unique pieces, and if I recall, those are relatively substantial. Those would also substantially reduce the size and may be able to completely avoid that. Kim, it would be maybe cool to get an example of an out-of-band invitation with a connectionless credential request in it to then experiment with what that looks like before and after. So since that's a little bit of a larger message, we tend to shove in a QR code.
Yeah, I could certainly do that. It'd be helpful if Stephen provided an example of one of those for me. And I can build a sample dictionary and run that through the process.
Steven, do you have one handy?
I'll find one. Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. That would be cool because it could yield great benefits in that particular case. Nice. So the other thing that I'd love to do is take a quick straw poll. Who thinks they may be interested in the adoption of compression like this in their implementations based on the ability to have a 50% reduction, approximately given our numbers, reduction in the message size used in out-of-band invitations. Raise a hand or something, or in chat. Who's interested in doing this? I mean, we're not committing yet. I'm just kind of like gauging interest in a straw poll.
Yeah, I'm not exactly close to it, so I'm going to talk to the people that didn't make this call, but that are more likely to know on our side.
Cool.
The wallet team on our side would know this way better than I.
Can I ask URL shortening is still an option, but it carries some downsides, particularly in more offline use cases.
One of the things we're doing is mobile wallet is a verifier, and then you're scanning QR codes on other phones.
Mm-hmm.
This is where this would be, this Kim's argument of a higher quality would be helpful, but also gets into you're a verifier, you're probably going to be doing a connectionless verify. So
right.
And shortening URLs is an option, but it gets tricky. Yeah. You have to have some component.
It's not just offline, Jorge, but you have to be careful which shortening service you use, because it may present a substantial leak in information if there's a nefarious party running the URL shortener. So if you're running your own, then you're presumably not a nefarious party, but that is something to be concerned with. So using existing commercial URL shorteners is usually not a good idea because of the privacy implications.
Sure.
Just as a side note.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, if it's important enough, you just run your own, right? That's not that complicated to solve, but sometimes it's not obvious to folks that are approaching the problem the first time. Can I ask Tim and Ariel, is there any, do you have any feel on your side? Is it a no, a yes, or a maybe?
It's a maybe. It's just Tim speaking. It's interesting. I mean, this is, I think it could be useful, but as Steven said, we need to talk more with the team.
Cool, and I'm totally happy. We don't need an answer today, so I appreciate that. Ariel, any response?
I think the same as Tim.
Perfect.
I will look at it and yeah, and let's see. Probably next week maybe we can discuss about it.
Okay, I'm going to record that this is a. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen, so you can't see the notes that I'm typing. But that's okay. We're about done anyway. I'm gonna write that this is a strong maybe. And so very cool. So thank you for the conversation there. I'm going to save the future topics. Again, a plea for anyone who wants to work on PRs for the DIDComm 2 conversion stuff. Happy to provide suggestions on how to begin if you're interested. And then we'll talk about common identifiers another time. But I felt like our time was really well spent today. Thank you to those involved, Stephen for the PRs and Kim for the discussion. And we will see you all elsewhere online and next week. Hope everyone's week is a great one.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.
See y'all.